Welcome to the Night Audio Stories channel. And today, I'm bringing you my new original story.
Welcome to Night Audio Stories channel. Here's a story. The Abandoned House on Highway 9. Autumn in Vermont smells different. Not the sweet apple scent advertised on tourist brochures, and not the clean, transparent fragrance of pine forests drifting down from the mountains. Vermont's autumn smells like rot, slow, patient, inevitable. The rot of leaves compressed beneath boots over years and decades. The rot of old farmhouse timbers sinking into the earth like exhausted old men. The rot of time itself, which seems to move differently here than in the rest of the world, slower and heavier, as though the very air has been saturated with something very ancient. Dennis Cole knew that smell by heart. He had been on the road for 7 years now, alone at first, then with Marcus, and in that time had visited more than 200 abandoned locations across the United States. Psychiatric hospitals in Georgia, derelict mines in Pennsylvania, half-collapsed hotels in Louisiana. He photographed, blogged, collected thousands of views and tens of thousands of followers who enjoyed watching the decay of other places from a safe distance, from behind a monitor with a coffee mug in hand. Marcus Hale had stumbled into all this by accident. 3 years ago, they'd met on some Urbex forum, a community of people who explore abandoned places, and discovered they lived in the same city, the same neighborhood in Boston, and that both of them shared an identical character flaw, an inability to stay put. Marcus was a photographer, a real one, with a degree and several exhibitions behind him, and what drew him wasn't so much the atmosphere of abandoned places as the way light behaves in spaces where it hasn't been invited for a long time, how it seeps through broken windows and lies across the floor in long, sickly bands, how it tries to illuminate what human memory prefers to keep in darkness. They had been driving for 6 hours. Dennis drove, an old gray Subaru with a scratched bumper and stickers from previous trips on the rear window. Marcus sat beside him, holding a laptop on his knees and a printout of a scanned old map. On the map, circled in red marker, was a point approximately 12 miles from a tiny town called Harlow, a microscopic settlement that barely existed on any modern navigation system. "Are you sure this is even a real place?" asked Marcus, not looking up from the map. "Found 3 independent sources, 2 archived newspaper articles from '91, and 1 entry in the county property registry. The house is registered to a man named Ezra Connors. He died in '87. After that, nothing. No transfer of title, no tax records, no court order for seizure. The house just exists, officially." "Do people in Harlow know anything?" Dennis was quiet for a moment. "I called there, the local general store, the only number I could find. A woman answered, but when I asked about the Connors house on Highway 9, he paused. She just hung up. Didn't even say she didn't know, just click." Marcus finally looked up from the map and studied Dennis. "And that doesn't concern you?" "It interests me very much," said Dennis, and he smiled slightly. Marcus knew that smile. It appeared every time Dennis sensed something worthwhile ahead, something that would give them material, something people would want to read and watch. In 3 years of traveling together, Marcus had learned to simultaneously love and fear that smile. It meant the return home was being postponed, that ahead lay discomfort, possibly danger, and almost certainly something unforgettable. The GPS had lost signal an hour earlier. Dennis had switched to the printout, an old yellowed map from a local archive website, and now they were navigating by road signs that grew increasingly sparse. The forest on both sides of the highway thickened. The leaves on the maples and aspens fell slowly, heavily, as if each leaf clung to its branch until the last moment. The sky between the canopy was the color of old pewter. "There should be a left turn," said Marcus, "after some kind of bridge over a creek." "I see the bridge already." They crossed a narrow wooden bridge. The planks rumbled under the Subaru's wheels, and immediately beyond it, Dennis saw the turn. He didn't so much see it as sense it. A gap between the trees, a barely visible trace of an old road, grown over in the center with grass and a narrow strip of young ferns. "There it is," he said quietly. Marcus pressed record on his phone. They always started recording before they even got out of the car, just in case, for the blog, the YouTube channel, for documentation, and simply because Dennis had once read on some Urbex forum, always document the moment of entry because you never know if you'll be able to document the moment of exit. He'd written it as a joke, but Marcus had not laughed.
They did not see it immediately. The forest held the house within itself, the way an old man holds a secret, tightly, confidently, without visible effort. The path wound between the trees for about a quarter mile, and all that time it seemed there was nothing ahead, that they were simply driving deeper into the forest with no purpose. And then the trees parted, and the house materialized before them, suddenly and silently, as if it had always stood there and had simply been waiting for someone to finally find the way. It was a large farmstead in the colonial style, typical of late 19th century New England. A 2-story main structure with a mansard roof, a wing to the left which had once been, perhaps, a pantry or summer kitchen. The vertical board siding that had once been white now had the color of sick skin, grayish-yellow with dark rain streaks and black patches of mold. The windows on the first floor were boarded up with plywood, but the plywood had long since warped and buckled, and through the gaps one could see the darkness inside, dense, opaque, as if the rooms were filled with something rather than empty. On the second floor, 3 of the 4 windows still had glass. The 4th, on the right, was broken, and the shards in the frame looked like teeth in an open mouth. The roof sagged in the center. The chimney on the left had tilted and was held in place, it seemed, purely by habit. The porch, wide with turned columns that had once given the estate a certain dignity, had half collapsed. 2 boards had given way, a third dangled from a single nail. Around the house, no trees. This was strange. The forest pressed in from all sides right up to the edge, but the house stood in the center of a small open clearing, as if the trees did not wish to draw close.
The grass around it was tall but wrong, not the living green grass that grows where there is moisture and sun, but dry, pale, coiled in on itself, as if every blade was trying to make itself as small as possible. "My God," Marcus breathed. He was already holding the camera, a large DSLR with a wide-angle lens, and slowly raising it to his eyes. "Shoot," said Dennis. "The light is good here."
Dennis was right. The sky over the clearing was open, and the afternoon sun, already low for October, was falling on the facade of the farmhouse at such an angle that the shadows from the windows stretched along the peeling siding like scars. It was beautiful. It was beautiful in the same way something is beautiful that has outlasted everyone who loved it. Marcus photographed. Dennis checked his gear: flashlight, spare batteries, dust mask, first aid kit, rope, carefully distributing everything among his pockets and pack. Then he opened his notebook and began writing. Arrival time, description of external appearance, weather conditions. It was a routine he maintained every time. Routine was calming. "There's something on the door," said Marcus, lowering his camera. Dennis looked up. The front door, heavy, oak with a tarnished brass handle, was ajar but not locked, and on it there was indeed something. At first it seemed like a natural knot in the wood, a pattern in the old board, but when they got closer, stepping around the gaps in the porch, Dennis saw it had been carved, deliberately, by someone's knife or chisel, deeply and carefully, with an understanding of what they were carving. It was a cross, but inverted, and around it a circle of small signs, similar to letters, but resembling no alphabet Dennis knew. "What language is that?" asked Marcus. "Don't know," replied Dennis, and photographed the door with his phone. "Could be some local symbolism. Could be teenagers. You find this stuff all the time in abandoned places." "The carving is old," observed Marcus. "Look at the edges. They've darkened the same way as the rest of the wood. It's at least 30 years old." Dennis looked. Marcus was right. "All right," said Dennis, and pushed the door open. The air inside the house had a smell difficult to describe to anyone who hadn't experienced it. It wasn't simply stuffiness, though stuffiness was there too. It wasn't merely mold, though mold covered the walls of the second-floor bedroom in whole colonies resembling maps of unknown continents. It wasn't the smell of rotting wood or old furniture. It was the smell of presence. Dennis had felt this before in the Tranquility Psychiatric Hospital in Georgia, where the corridors were so saturated with human pain and fear that the air there seemed physically heavier. In an old prison in Louisiana, where the death row cells retained something for which there was no proper word. Every truly frightening place has its own smell. The smell with which a space becomes saturated when something that shouldn't be happening keeps happening there for years. But here, that smell was stronger than anywhere before. Marcus immediately switched on his flashlight. Dennis did too. 2 cones of white light carved from the darkness of vestibule, wide with wood paneling on the walls, with a staircase to the right rising to the second floor. On the floor, a layer of dry leaves that had drifted in through the cracks. An armchair in the corner collapsed, the upholstery torn, the stuffing matted. On the wall, a rectangular shadow where a painting or mirror had once hung. The painting or mirror itself was gone. "Dennis, we start on the left," said Dennis.
They passed through an archway into the left room, the former sitting room. Here there were more furnishings, a long dining table, chairs around it, most broken or overturned, a wardrobe in the corner, doors open. Inside the wardrobe, empty, only a few wooden hangers, and on the lower shelf a stack of what had once been paper, now fused into a uniform gray mass by moisture. Marcus photographed methodically, moving along the walls. Dennis made notes. Both were silent. This too was part of their routine. In the first minutes in a new place, it was better to be silent and listen. Listen to how the house reacts to your presence, how it settles, creaks, breathes. This house did not creak. That was strange. Any old house creaks when people enter it. Thermal deformations, response to weight, a million micro-movements accumulated in the wood over decades. This one was silent, completely, unnaturally silent, as if the timber had long since lost all elasticity and transformed into something else, something that did not respond to the presence of people. "Dennis," said Marcus quietly from the other end of the room. "What? Come here."
Dennis came. Marcus was standing by the fireplace, large with a stone surround, and shining his flashlight inside. The fireplace was not empty. On the grate lay ash, but not the gray, light ash that wood or coal leaves behind. This ash was black and looked wet, though there was no possible source of moisture in the fireplace. And among the ash, bones, small, thin bones, too small to be human, probably a bird or a cat, but they were arranged strangely, symmetrically, almost deliberately, as if someone had placed them that way. "Someone burned something here recently," said Marcus. "Squatters, maybe," replied Dennis, though there was no confidence in his voice. "In a place this remote, with this kind of—" Marcus gestured toward the fireplace. "This kind of deliberateness?" Dennis didn't answer. He took several photos of the fireplace with his phone, then stepped back and resumed examining the room. On the ceiling of the sitting room he noticed writing, small, made with pencil or charcoal directly on the plaster. He raised his flashlight and tilted his head, trying to make out the words. Most were illegible, erased by time or deliberately rubbed out. But in one spot, in the right corner where the ceiling met the wall, the words had survived. Dennis read them aloud without thinking. "He hears you when you arrive. He always hears." Silence. "Who is he?" asked Marcus. "Don't know," said Dennis, but someone clearly wanted that thought to remain. They left the sitting room and passed through the corridor into the kitchen. The kitchen was large by the standards of the era. A wide wooden table in the center, a metal sink by the window, an old wood-burning stove in the corner. On the table stood 3 plates. Dennis approached and leaned over them. The plates had food on them. Old food. Dried, blackened, shriveled beyond recognition. But food. Someone had set the table for 3 and left everything as is. Forks lay beside the plates. Cups, 3 of them as well, stood to the left. Dennis carefully touched one of the cups. Inside, nothing. Empty. "They left and never came back," he said quietly. "Or something made them leave so quickly that they didn't even clear the table," Marcus replied. "Who? Connors died in '87, the newspaper article said. Died at home, alone, no family.
So why 3 plates? Marcus didn't answer. He was photographing the table, methodically, from different angles, with different exposures, trying to capture in frame that feeling of nameless dread the set table radiated in the empty kitchen. Through the window above the sink, the sun had dropped lower, and the shadow of the forest now lay across the clearing in front of the house. The kitchen grew darker. Marcus raised his flashlight, and at that moment they both heard a sound. It was hard to call it a sound in the ordinary sense. It was more like a change in the quality of the silence. The silence became denser, heavier, as if someone in the house had taken a deep breath and not exhaled. And then, very quietly, from above, from the second floor, came a creak. "It's just the house settling," said Dennis. "The house hasn't settled since we've been here," Marcus replied. "We've been in it for 20 minutes, and it was completely quiet." "Maybe thermal." "Dennis." Marcus was staring at the ceiling. Dennis looked up too. Both were silent and listening. The creak repeated, slow, measured, with a clear pause between each sound. Not chaotic, the way thermal expansion of wood sounds. Measured, like footsteps. Someone was walking upstairs. Dennis and Marcus looked at each other. In situations like this, there are 2 kinds of people, those who run and those who need to know. Both of them, unfortunately for themselves, belonged to the second type. Dennis pointed a finger at the ceiling, then at the staircase. Marcus nodded. They went out into the corridor and approached the stairs. Dennis went first. The stairs creaked, but now, under their own feet, that creak sounded entirely different from what they had heard from above. On the second floor, a hallway. To the left, 3 doors. To the right, 1. All closed. The creaking had stopped. "Where was it coming from?" Marcus whispered. "Left side, I think." They approached the first door on the left. Dennis took the handle, pressed it down slowly, and pushed it open. The flashlight illuminated a child's room. A small bed in the corner, a frame without a mattress, a dresser under the window. On the wall, wallpaper patterned with ships, faded to near invisibility. On the floor, paint flakes. Nothing more. No signs of presence. Dennis lowered the flashlight and noticed the dust on the floor bore no footprints. A smooth, undisturbed layer of dust, marked only by their own fresh tracks. The second room, a bedroom. A bed with rusted metal frame, no mattress. A wardrobe, open, empty. Mold on the walls in irregular circles. The smell here was heavier, something rotten and at the same time sharp, like vinegar or old metal. The third room. Dennis took the handle and felt it was warmer than metal handles should be in a cold house. He turned to Marcus. Marcus had felt it too. He was staring at Dennis's wrist, then raised his eyes. Dennis opened the door. The room was larger than the others. Once, perhaps, it had been a study or the master bedroom. A wide window, that same one with the broken glass they'd seen from outside. Wind from the window stirred rags of some fabric hanging from the ceiling. The floor in this room was darker than elsewhere, as if the wood had been soaked through with something dark that could no longer evaporate. In the center of the room stood a chair, old, with a high back, upholstered in what had once been dark crimson velvet, now faded to the color of dried blood. The chair faced the door with its back to the window, and someone was sitting in it. Dennis felt his heart drop somewhere below its usual position. But then the flashlight illuminated the details, and he exhaled. It wasn't a man, it was a scarecrow, or rather a mannequin, something stuffed with rags and dressed in an old black suit. On its head, a wide-brimmed hat that covered its face down to the chin. The hands, wooden, resembling doll joints, rested on the armrests. "What the hell?" Marcus exhaled. He raised his camera and began shooting. Dennis moved closer to the chair, circling it carefully, as though afraid of disturbing it. He wanted to look under the hat. He leaned in and lifted the brim. Under the hat there was no mannequin face. Under the hat was a skull, a real one, human, yellowed with time, with empty eye sockets staring directly at Dennis. The lower jaw hung slightly, so that the skull seemed to be smiling. Dennis recoiled sharply and struck his shoulder against the wall. "What?" Marcus rushed toward him. There are human bones in there." Marcus carefully lifted the hat brim himself, looked, and set it back down. His face remained composed. The photographer in him always overpowered the person who was afraid, but his hands trembled slightly as he readjusted the camera. "We need to call the police," he said. "Yes," Dennis agreed, "but first I want to look at the walls." Because he had already seen the walls, and they demanded attention. The walls of the room were covered in writing, not pencil or chalk, something darker, something that had dried in uneven rivulets, looking like blood, though Dennis didn't want to think about that resemblance right now. The writing ran from floor to ceiling in a solid layer, overlapping in dozens of layers, some fresher, some older. That same illegible alphabet that was on the door, but between them, ordinary English words. Dennis read fragments. "He does not sleep. Third night without the voice. Now he enters through the mirrors. Don't go out after sundown. He waits between the trees. Ezra knew how to keep him contained. Ezra is gone now. We heard footsteps, we heard breathing, we heard our own names in the darkness. And lower, written larger and more carefully than the rest, he lives in the empty space between seconds. When the clock does not tick, he is there."
Dennis looked at his watch. An ordinary digital watch he'd bought 3 years ago and couldn't recall ever stopping. Now the display showed nothing. No digits, no signal, just a black rectangle of glass. He shoved Marcus with his elbow and showed him the watch. Marcus took out his phone. The screen would not turn on. "Battery?" he asked. "I charged it in the car," said Dennis. "It was at 90% when we came in." Marcus picked up his camera phone, the one he'd been recording video on. That one wouldn't turn on either. The camera, the big DSLR, functioned, but the screen that was supposed to show the photos was dark. Only the mechanics worked, only the shutter clicked, but no electronics. "We're leaving," said Dennis. That decision came to him more easily than he expected.
3 years and 200 locations had calibrated his sense of the balance between curiosity and common sense. Skulls in armchairs and non-functioning electronics, that was already on the wrong side of the line. They turned toward the door. The door was closed. Dennis was certain he had left it open. He pulled the handle. The door did not yield. Did it lock itself? Marcus came over and pulled too. Nothing. There's no lock here. Look, he directed the flashlight at the door frame. No locking mechanism. Old handle, old hinge, and that was it. The door simply would not open. "We break it," said Dennis. He stepped back and hit it with his shoulder. The door didn't even shudder. Marcus tried with his foot, American instinct, like in the movies. Nothing. The wood was old, but it held as if something was bracing it from the other side. "The window," said Marcus, and they both turned toward the broken window. Dennis approached the sill and looked out. Second floor, 5 or 6 meters to the ground. Possible to jump, but risk of breaking something. He scanned the exterior wall and spotted a drain pipe on the left side of the window. Rusty, but probably still holding. "Down the pipe," he said. "You first, I'll follow." "What are you going to cover me with?" Marcus asked skeptically. Dennis didn't answer, because at that moment, Marcus's flashlight began to flicker. Once, twice, 3 times, and went out. The darkness was absolute. No one who has not stood in the darkness of an old house without any source of light can fully imagine what it is like. It isn't simply the absence of visibility. Darkness in such places is a physical substance. It presses against the skin. It enters the lungs with the air. It changes the sound around you. Dennis felt his pupils dilating uselessly, trying to catch even a single photon. Nothing. He retrieved his own flashlight, the backup, small, always kept in the side pocket of his pack. Pressed the button, a flash, sharp, and darkness. Dead batteries. "Marcus, do you have spares?" "In the pack. 1 second." In the darkness, Dennis heard Marcus moving, the rustle of the pack's fabric, the snap of a buckle, and at that moment he heard something else. Breathing. Not Marcus's. He could locate Marcus's breathing, to his left, about a meter away. This breathing was coming from the corner of the room, from the corner where the chair was. Dennis froze. The breathing was slow, steady, deep, like a person asleep, or like someone waiting very patiently. "Marcus," he whispered. "Got it." Marcus clicked new batteries into the flashlight, and the room flooded with light.
The chair was empty. The hat lay on the floor. The skull, Dennis scanned the room quickly, hadn't gone anywhere. It lay near the base of the chair, on its side. But in the corner of the room, the corner from which the breathing had come, on the wall was a fresh stain. Dark, wet, still glistening. It had not been there when they entered. Dennis approached and leaned in. The stain smelled of metal. "Out through the window," he said, and this time there was no room in his voice for discussion. Marcus approached the window first, looked out, assessed the pipe, swung one leg over the sill. At that moment, something, Dennis didn't see it, only felt the movement in the air, pushed Marcus. Marcus disappeared through the window without a sound. Dennis lunged to the sill and looked down. Marcus lay below. He had fallen onto the old grass, about a meter from the wall. He was moving, good, alive, and trying to get up. "Marcus, are you okay?" "My leg," Marcus groaned. "Something wrong with my leg.
But it works. Jump! Dennis didn't think. He grabbed the windowsill, tried to reach the drain pipe. The pipe was too far, and pushed off from the wall, trying to jump as far from the house as possible. He landed well, cat-like, on his hands and feet, and rolled over one shoulder. Painful, but nothing broken. He stood and looked around. Marcus was on his feet, favoring one leg, the other clearly hurt, maybe sprained. The house stood behind them, the clearing, the forest ahead. The sun had set. Dennis hadn't noticed when it happened. Inside the house, time seemed to have stopped. They thought they'd been inside for 40 minutes, no more. But around them was evening darkness, not night yet, but that blue, uncertain twilight in which distances and shapes become unreliable. "The car," said Marcus. They went, Marcus limping, Dennis offering his shoulder. The path to the car seemed longer. Dennis knew this psychological phenomenon. The return journey always feels longer, especially when you're in a hurry. But he was counting steps in his head, and the count didn't match how many they'd taken on the way to the house, as if the path had grown. "Do you see the car?" Marcus asked. "Not yet. Should be around that bend." They rounded the bend. There was no car, just another straight stretch of path that disappeared into darkness between the trees. Dennis stopped. "We couldn't have gotten lost. There's only one path." "Dennis," Marcus said quietly. "What?" "Look at the trees."
Dennis raised his flashlight. Trees, maples and aspens, in the darkness resembling the silhouettes of people standing too still. And on some trees, on the trunks, were signs, that same illegible alphabet that was on the door and the walls of the house, carved into the bark, fresh. The white wood beneath the bark had not yet darkened. "Someone carved them recently," said Marcus, "while we were inside. Or they were always here and we just didn't notice on the way in." Dennis offered an alternative he didn't believe himself. They walked on. The forest around them deepened completely because the afterglow of sunset had already faded and the sky between the canopy had turned almost black. Marcus's flashlight gave enough light to see the path, nothing more. Dennis heard the sound first. Footsteps. Behind them. Slow, measured, the same rhythm they'd heard in the room with the chair. He gripped Marcus's arm. Marcus stopped. Both listened. The footsteps stopped. "Move," Dennis whispered. They quickened their pace. Marcus limped faster than seemed possible for someone with a damaged ankle. Dennis walked beside him, turning the flashlight back to illuminate the path behind them. Nothing, darkness and trees. And then something stepped out onto the path behind them from between the trees. Dennis saw it for a fraction of a second before the flashlight flickered and died again. But that fraction of a second was enough to see the silhouette. Tall, too tall for a person of normal height, disproportionately long limbs. It stood motionless in the middle of the path and seemed to be looking at them, though in the darkness Dennis could not make out a face. "Run," he told Marcus. They ran. Marcus groaned with pain but ran. Dennis could see in the darkness better than expected. His eyes had adapted, and the faint starlight filtering through the canopy gave enough orientation to keep to the path. They burst out onto the clearing before the bridge. The car was there where they had left it, by the side of the path next to the bridge. Dennis retrieved his keys. He never put them in his pack, only in his trouser pocket, and pressed them into Marcus's hand.
Get in and start it. And you? Start it! Marcus grabbed the keys and ran to the car. Dennis turned and shone his phone. Yes, the phone suddenly worked again, and in that unexpected relief, something wrong was lurking, but he wasn't thinking about that now. Toward the path. The path was empty. Silence. The Subaru's engine coughed and started. Dennis walked back to the car without taking his eyes from the path. Got into the passenger seat. Marcus was already pulling a U-turn. "Drive," said Dennis. They got on to Highway 9. Marcus pressed the accelerator. The headlights carved the road ahead. "What did you see?" Marcus asked, not looking at Dennis. "I don't know." "Dennis!" "I don't know what I saw, Marcus. Something on the path."
They drove in silence. Dennis watched out the window. The forest on both sides of the highway floated past in the darkness. He held his phone in his hands and was thinking that they'd need to call the police as soon as they reached town. Because of the skull, because there were probably someone's remains in the house. He looked at his phone. On the screen, a message, one from an unknown number. No area code, just 6 zeros. Timestamp, today, 5 minutes ago. The text of the message consisted of one sentence. "You should not have lifted the hat." Dennis set the phone down. "Marcus, drive faster." "I'm already—" Marcus didn't finish. The engine died. The car stopped in the middle of the highway. Marcus turned the key. Silence. Again, silence. The headlights went out. Everything went out. The Subaru became an inert lump of metal in the middle of a dark highway in a Vermont forest at night. "What happened?" asked Marcus, and in his voice for the first time all day was genuine panic. "Don't know. The battery, maybe. A battery can't just like that." Dennis opened the door and got out. The air outside was colder than he expected. Not simply October cold, but something sharper, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees in the last few minutes. He walked around the car, raised the hood. In the darkness, nothing was visible. His flashlight wasn't working. His phone, he checked, wasn't working either, again. "Marcus, get out." Marcus got out, leaning on the car. His leg clearly hurt. "How far to Harlow?" he asked. 7 miles, maybe 8. "I can't walk 7 miles with my leg like this." "You won't walk alone. We'll go together." Dennis understood. Waiting on the road was not an option. Almost no one drove Highway 9 at night. He had seen this driving in. Not a single car in either direction the whole way from Harlow. Better to move. Better to be in motion. They walked. Marcus leaned on Dennis's shoulder. The forest on both sides of the highway seemed alive, not aggressively, not demonstratively, but in some quiet, patient way, like a crowd of people observing something and saying nothing. They had walked perhaps a quarter mile. Then Marcus stopped. "Dennis." "What?" "Look back." Dennis turned. On the highway, about 100 meters behind them, stood a figure. In the darkness, it was almost invisible, just a silhouette against the slightly lighter sky above the road. Tall, motionless, the same disproportionality in the limbs. "We didn't pass anything like that when we were driving," Marcus whispered. "The highway was empty." "I know." "Where did it come from?" "I don't know, Marcus."
The figure did not move, just stood and presumably watched, though at that distance in the darkness this was impossible to confirm. Dennis thought of the inscriptions on the walls. He doesn't sleep. He enters through the mirrors. He waits between the trees. He thought of the skull beneath the hat, of the message on the phone. "Let's go," he said quietly. "Don't look at it, just walk." They walked. Dennis counted in his head, 100 steps, 200. He did not turn around. On step 243, Marcus said in a strangled voice, "It's closer." Dennis turned. The figure was standing 40 meters away. It wasn't moving. He was ready to swear it hadn't moved, but it was closer, as if the distance between them was shrinking without any movement. Dennis remembered the line from the wall. He lives in the empty space between seconds. When the clock does not tick, he is there. When you are not watching, when between moments there is a pause, that is when he moves. "Don't take your eyes off it," Dennis said to Marcus. "Keep watching. Don't blink." "What?" "Just do as I say." They walked faster, backward, facing the dark, unmoving figure on the highway. Dennis did not allow himself to blink longer than necessary. Marcus did the same, and then Marcus stumbled. It was a crack in the asphalt, ordinary, the kind that is everywhere on old New England roads. The leg with the damaged ankle gave way, and Marcus fell. Not for more than a second. He immediately began to rise, and Dennis leaned down to help him, and for that 1 second, both of them looked away from the figure. 1 second. Dennis raised his head. The figure was standing 2 meters away from them. He saw now what this was, and one part of his consciousness, the part responsible for rational explanation, screamed that this could not be real, that the brain under extreme conditions generates hallucinations, that there is an explanation, there is always an explanation. But the other part, older, deeper, the part that lives in the brain since the time people hid from the darkness in caves and knew that in the darkness there were things for which they had no words yet. This part was silent, simply silent, because there were no words for what he was seeing. Then darkness, complete, absolute. Their car was found 3 days later. It was standing in the middle of Highway 9, 8 miles from Harlow, with the doors open and the keys in the ignition. Tracks on the shoulder led into the forest. 2 sets of footprints, one of which showed the uneven gait of a person with an injured leg. The tracks stopped approximately 100 meters from the highway, in a spot where the ground had been flattened, as if something had happened there, and beyond that point, nothing. No tracks, no signs of a struggle. Dennis Cole and Marcus Hale were never found. Among the personal belongings left in the car was Marcus's camera. The police photographer who documented the scene retrieved it from the car and sent it to the forensics lab. The technician who reviewed the photos made an official statement. The camera contained 240 images from the interior of the old house. Clear, quality, well composed. The last 12 photos had been taken outside, blurred and dark. The final photo, a blurred black streak that could have been camera movement or something else, contained in the right edge of the frame a fragment of something, something very large and very close to the lens. The technician wrote in his report that the image was unidentifiable. He wrote it twice, once in the official report, once in the margins in pencil, in his own handwriting. The house on Highway 9 still stands. In the county property registry, it is still listed under Ezra Connors. No new records, no new residents, only the house and the forest around it, and the empty chair in the room on the second floor, where the wind from the broken window stirs the rags on the ceiling, and where, if you come at night and stand very still and listen, you can hear slow, steady, patient breathing. But you should not go there. He hears you when you come. He always hears.
Thank you for listening till the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear more interesting stories.